Recovery Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Miller. I'm a stroke survivor and grateful recovering alcoholic. Today's episode is called I Don't Know What Happened. And I'll be talking about the stories that we tell ourselves in difficult times, specifically the ones that we use in order to avoid taking care of ourselves, putting our health first. We can make excuses easily for why we don't need to prioritize our health on any given day because this or that happened. We can put conditions on our healthy habits, like if this happens, then I won't go to the gym, or if my husband leaves me, I'll drink, or if there is a tight deadline at work, then I will work through lunch, or in my case, if I work just a little more, then I achieve my goal and then I'll rest my head. And you can see where that left me. I have one body to take care of. This is it. And if this one breaks, I don't get a new one. So why do I put ifs against my well-being? Because I feel like I never think that the worst is going to happen to me, even though the worst, the worst is relatively speaking, right? But I never imagined that I was going to have a stroke. And so after I did have a stroke, I never imagined that that stroke was going to take me out of my career. But so in order to not let that happen, I just kept acting as if I was okay. And so when I look at my life, generally speaking, I feel like I've always let circumstances control my life. Like things are happening to me and I react to them. And I say a lot of times I can't control people, places, and things. I can only control my reaction. So it's my reaction that I'm referring to here. It's those micro reactions that we don't always pay attention to that add up to circumstances we suddenly find ourselves in. And we say, I don't know what happened. Everything was fine. And then I gained 10 pounds. Or everything was fine. And then I drank. Or once again, in my case, everything was fine. And then I had unbearable, unmanageable pain in my head. And if you would have asked me 7 years ago, Rachel, if you had a stroke 7 years from now, would you drink? I would have absolutely said yes. What's the point in being sober then? That's what I would have thought, for sure. Because I was really searching for loopholes. I was trying to find an excuse. And that would have been, I think, a good one back then, that I would have thought, well, what's the point? I didn't drink, and I haven't yet. I always like to put yet at the end because I'm really doing this one day at a time. And I'm making these micro reactions as life is happening. Like, when COVID came upon us, I started going to more meetings virtually. I was going every morning. Now, I did not necessarily stay awake for the 7 a.m. meeting, but I did sign in. And that matters. It might sound silly, but it does matter because it really, I didn't know it was happening at the time, but I was building a habit. And once I got my Weimaraner and she wanted to get up at 6:30 every morning, then I started being awake for my 7 a.m. meetings. Why did I log on to the meeting and not stay awake? Well, probably because I knew that I needed a meeting. It was a good time because I needed to get up for work anyway. But I found myself like very relaxed just listening. And anyway, it became a habit for me. And it was what I would consider a micro reaction to COVID because it, you know, it gave me a little more of a stronger sobriety by doing that. And in the same way, I've been going to stroke survivor meetings because of my stroke. And this is just like a micro reaction. It's something that I realize that I need in order to give me just a little more of what I need. Give me a little more, a boost for my mental health. And like that, starting this podcast because I can't work, it was a micro reaction. It was not a big thing that I had planned all these years that I was going to podcast. I really never imagined at all that I would podcast. But it just, I didn't even think twice about it. I just reached out to my brother and said, this has to happen. Can you create a podcast account? So that's as simple as it was. I didn't have a big plan. I usually do. I usually would have thought it through, and I would have created a big project plan, and I would have figured out how I'm going to implement it and all of that, but I didn't. I just did it because I needed something. I needed a boost. I was scared that I was going to drink or that I was going to ask my doctor for some sort of muscle relaxers or something, and I knew that that wasn't healthy for me. So instead, I'm doing the podcast, and I haven't stopped. I'm doing these things so that I don't find myself in a circumstance where I react by having a drink and then say, I don't know what happened. Everything was fine. And then I drank. If I do things like start going to more meetings or start the podcast or go to stroke survivor support groups, if I do these things before I find myself in a really heavy situation, then I am avoiding this buildup. I hear that that the first, how does it go? The first drink, you are planning to take your first drink far before you actually pick one up or something like that. And I believe it's these micro reactions to what's going on in our lives, and they orient us in whatever direction that that we need to go, or that results in by our micro reactions. So I need to have constant self evaluation when I think everything is fine. And I'll give you an example here in a minute about how I did not do this after I had my stroke, how I did not have a constant self-evaluation as far as like how is my health and well-being. So when everything is fine, I may have negative micro reactions. And so here's several, quite a few examples about what I was doing over the past 2 years after my stroke that added up to my current circumstance. So if you listen to this podcast cast because you are a recovering alcoholic, or you want to be a recovering alcoholic, or you are relapsing. This example is about how I did not do things the past 2 years that encourage my health in the aspect of like my vision and my headaches and migraines and what's happening with my brain. But you can imagine how this translates into sobriety and how we make these small decisions every day based on things that are happening in our lives. And we have a choice how we're going to react, how, if we're going to respond or react, how we're going to do these little micro reactions in the way of sobriety. Like, I'm driving home from work, I think, oh, I'm so tired today, I'm just going to skip the meeting and drive all the way home, is something that, I remember thinking sometimes when I was driving home to West Virginia from Virginia, and just skipping a meeting, and that is a negative micro reaction. So just consider how this might relate to sobriety for those of you who are more interested in that line of conversation. So this is what I did over the past 2 years. I wrote down some of these examples of how maybe I made some negative micro reactions. So number one, I started increasing computer time even though I felt no progress. My doctor told me to start with 15 minutes on the computer and 2 hours off the computer and keep rotating. And then once I stopped feeling symptoms, then I could increase the amount of time by like 5 minutes on the computer. And then once I started feeling symptoms again, then I would take another break. Well, here's the thing. I never didn't feel symptoms. And I just, I don't know. I just thought that it was going to go away. But it didn't. And I kept increasing time on the computer, and I kept feeling symptoms the whole time. But it wasn't an option. I thought, for me to go back to the doctor and say, this isn't working. Because I got the impression that it was supposed to work, that this is it. This is what you have to do. And I didn't think, well, I'm not going to go back to work. Like, I didn't think of any of that. I just thought, I'm going to go right back to work, because I didn't even take a break. Maybe I took a week or two. I'm not sure. I slept a lot in the beginning. But I didn't consider that this was something that was going to take me out. And I mentioned that yesterday. The second one, I started driving even though I felt uncomfortable. So I didn't drive for like the first 3 months, I think, while I was on short-term disability. And when I got to the point where I was going to go on long-term disability and I decided against it, and I just started working full-time again, working flexible hours thanks to my boss. But I thought, okay, well, I'm doing normal things. I'm also going to drive. And I'll tell you, I didn't feel comfortable driving, but I did it anyway. I felt about the same as I would feel if I was drunk driving. I know that's scary for me to say, but that's what I felt like. But yet I felt like, well, it's not like I'm never going to drive again, so I guess this is how I'm driving now. I just never seemed to have anyone other than my boyfriend, probably, and maybe my boss, saying it's okay if nothing's changing, or maybe things aren't going to change, or maybe we need to go get a second opinion. Maybe people told me that and I didn't listen. It's really hard for me to say. But I am just here sharing my experience and my memory of what happened. If you can relate to it, those of you who also had a stroke. So the next thing I did that was terrible was I traveled to San Diego. I took a flight to San Diego for a business trip, and I felt absolutely terrible while I was there, but I fought through it. We had like a work conference. It was just internal to us, and I just I remember sitting in the conference room, and we were sitting at this big, like, all the tables were set up like a rectangle so we could all see each other. I've explained how difficult it is for me to like move my eyes and stuff. And so imagine I'm just sitting in this room and there's people everywhere. There's a big, gigantic like screen to the left of me. And then there's just people everywhere and everyone's talking and there's lights and I just sat through it. Well, I even went to dinner because there was like a big group dinner. Um, and by the last day, I think it was like 3 o'clock or something, we ended. And I said, there was supposed to be a big baseball game that everybody was going to. And I said, I can't do. I was actually felt like I was going to fall over. Like I've talked about that. Like my brain is a TV set and it's about to be turned off. That's what it felt like, that I was just going to fall over. So, excuse me, I told my boss, like, I can't do it. And I actually went up to the president also and I said, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here, but I have to go to sleep. And so I went back to the room and slept for like 14 hours, I think, until my flight the next day. But that's still, you'd think that was a sign that I was doing too much. And I had to recover for weeks after that trip. And I would also go into work, and after having driven in, I would have to go into my office and sit in my office with the door shut and the lights off with sunglasses on and look down, like look away from the door because I had a window beside the door that you could see the hallway and people walking by and the bright lights and stuff like that. And again, you would think that was a sign that I was doing too much, but I just kept doing it. And I did things like performance reviews and budgets on big, gigantic spreadsheets. You can imagine what that possibly felt like in my head. And I do remember the people that I was working with on that were concerned that I was plugging away at that, but I just did it. I did it, and then I was in bed all afternoon, like trying to sleep it off. Um, but it just, I guess, kept building. I think the pain and the discomfort just kept building. And and I remember working on I was working on a problem. There was like a system error that we were getting on something that I was working on, and I remember being up until like midnight after having gotten up at 6:30 in the morning and being up until midnight or 1, like working on this problem. And the rubber band feeling around my head and the hangover feeling in the morning were just debilitating. I mean, I just couldn't even barely look at anything anymore. And yet I just kept going. I it's bizarre. It's bizarre. And then one day I was having a conversation with one of the women in HR, and I actually stopped. And I stopped right in my tracks. If I was like a Roadrunner cartoon, you would have heard me just come to a screeching halt. And she said, you know, she recommended that maybe I needed to not stop, or she said I needed to take a break. I needed to take care of myself. I needed to take a break. And what I knew then was that if I stop and I take a break, that's it. I know that I can't keep working. And so I kept refusing to stop. And I didn't stop until that day. And once I did, that was it. I mean, she was right. It was just like, I think it was having somebody just, I don't even know if I cried. I may have cried. I don't know. But having somebody just get quiet with me. There's a lot to be said for silence. And she just got quiet with me, and she said, you know, she said, just like I said at the beginning of the episode, like, I only have one body. Like, I only get one chance. Why am I doing this to myself? And she was right. And I will be forever grateful to her for saying that to me, because I just was running myself into the ground, really. And I thought, at the time, I thought I was fine, and then all of a sudden I wasn't fine. That's what I thought. If anybody were to ask me during, like, 5 months ago, where are we at? Like almost 6 months ago now. If somebody were to ask me, I would have said, I don't know what happened. I was fine, and then all of a sudden I wasn't fine. And see, like, I never was fine. I was never fine from the moment I had the stroke. I never got fine, ever. And I was making these micro reactions that built the circumstance that resulted in me saying, I don't know what happened. I was afraid I had another stroke. It was like my health just fell off of a cliff. And I was making excuses to put something else in front of my health. And in this case, it was work. But this kind of behavior comes in all shapes and sizes. Things like, once I get promoted, I'll slow down. Or after Thanksgiving, I'll go on a diet. Or it's raining, so I'll go running tomorrow instead. Or if I get laid off, I'm going to drink. Or I'll get sober after the new year. These are all ways we put conditions on our health and well-being. And then we find ourselves somewhere we don't want to be, with extra weight we don't want to have, drunk when we want to be sober, and in pain that we don't have to feel. So I'm encouraging you and myself to be aware of our daily micro reactions, because they very much can leave us letting circumstances control our lives. We have every opportunity daily, throughout the day, to orient the direction of our circumstances. In many cases, of course, it's not in all cases. I mean, I was willing to suffer through another MRI, questioning, I don't know what happened, rather than reflecting on all of the missteps I have made over the past 2 years. I mean, I did not even talk about it. I didn't talk about how much pain I was in. So clearly, self love takes practice, and it's just as vital to our survival as food and water. So I will keep working on mine, and I will keep showing up here in order to help share with you what I discover in my own uh, journey. So, thank you for listening. And if you have not yet clicked follow, please follow my channel. And I will talk to you tomorrow.